Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mark Anthony's Music Picks. Today is episode 125, and it has been at least 2 weeks since I recorded my last episode. I had some significant life changes happen in the last month or two, and it's definitely slowed down my ability to make these videos, but I'm still going to keep chugging along because, like I said previously, I really do enjoy making these, and I love interacting with you guys. So today's video is going to be, like I said, a tribute towards Andrew Weatherall. Now, I have to admit, before I even start this episode, Andrew Weatherall is somebody that I didn't really even learn about until probably sometime in the last 5 years is when I started to really get a glimpse of his catalog, hear about him, see him mentioned on forums. For whatever reason, he and his music has just eluded me. I think some of it is due to some of the genres that he preferred to make music in. I think, especially in the early 90s, being on labels like Warp, which were very strongly favored amongst European people, but not as much people here in the States, at least not people that I hung out with. I think it kept him sort of like as a name that I always heard about or maybe knew about to just a slight extent, but I never really dove into his catalog. Andrew Weatherall was very much loved and highly, highly respected by people in the music scene. And to me, it seems like people that were really in the scene and true musicians were the ones that loved him the most because no matter how popular he got, no matter how many thousands of copies of a record he sold, he always stayed grounded. If you watch his interviews, I watched one of the interviews where it was, I can't remember who hosted the interview, but there was somebody interviewing him, and you could see he was like doing like a carving as he was talking about his music and his career and his life, and you just couldn't help but love him because he was so honest in the interview. He talked about partying with people. He talked about specifically trying to stay out of having DJing as a career. He just wanted it to be a job so that it was fun to him and that he didn't get lost in the hype and have to compromise his artistic integrity while becoming popular. Andrew, in some of his aliases, and I mean there are 20, probably 30 different aliases and groups that he was a part of, he didn't limit his music. So in the electronic realm, he was most known for house and techno, but he also experimented with different types of experimental, left field, ambient, electro, different types of rock that I don't even know what the actual accurate descriptors are for it. So we're talking about a guy that had music as his entire life, and from in his 20s until his unfortunate passing in 2020 due to a pulmonary embolism, which is a blood clot that I believe occurs somewhere in your chest, travels to a place where it gets stuck and shuts down blood flow. That's ultimately what caused Andrew to pass away. But for his whole career, he really stayed true to himself, never sold out, right? He never sold out, and I think that's why people just absolutely loved him so much. He was like the clubbers DJ, like the people that were really into the music, they always loved him. And I know that by making this episode, I actually spent probably twice as much time researching and preparing and letting this one settle in, because for me to not have been there in the UK partying in the 90s and the 2000s and the 2010s and never getting to see him live, I know that I'm like tiptoeing on sacred ground here. So I really want to be respectful of him. And this episode is more of me coming in after the fact and not really, honestly, getting too much of a glimpse of his catalog until the last 2 years. I think it was almost like his death brought him into the headlines and got me looking like, hey, what are all these releases that he's done? So anyways, today I have 5 of my favorite Weatherall records for you. This is going to be part 1 of possibly a multi-part series because his catalog is freaking massive. And like I said, I only have just begun to dip my toes into it, but I do think the 5 records that I picked for you today are some of the most like emblematic records out of his catalog. I'm sure there's some other major treasures in there, and I'm looking forward to digging through. The first is from 1991, and this is by a group called Primal, and it's called Don't Fight It, Feel It. and I love this because it is a great glimpse into early 90s rave music. You can hear the almost like the cliched but very well executed major key piano in this. It's kind of leading the charge. This is a daytime outdoor rave record that absolutely rocks. A couple of the elements in here that really stand out is almost like the deep rolling, very sincere, almost like hip hop influenced bass line. And one of the aspects of the track that I really like a lot is how the strong percussion, like there's like a ping pang, like some really sharp driving percussion that you'll hear in the sample that just hits really well. And that's something that I noticed a lot about Andrew Weatherall's tracks. I mean, I'm talking tracks from the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s. He really picked some strong elements, and it kind of reminded me of some of Levon Vincent's early works. Not in the overall sound, but in the way that Levon would strategically set elements up, percussion elements up, and have them hit in like a very clever and sophisticated, like hooky way. Like anybody that can make a hook out of a percussion element, like I always admire that, and Andrew did very well here. So my pick for you here is the Scat Mix. It's an 8-minute almost song. It has a very song-like arrangement, and if you listen to this record specifically from beginning to end, I just love how it builds up and kicks into gear and really just engages you. I've often talked before about how Damien Lazarus was a major influence on me in the late 2000s. I stumbled onto his album Smoke the Monster Out that came out on Crosstown, and I really respected and almost adored how odd and well executed that album was. And listening to Damien Lazarus, and also back then hearing these stories about the kind of weird shit that he would play at his after hours parties. Like in the late 2000s, he had a reputation of just being completely off of his rocker, playing like wacky sets, almost to the same extent or maybe even more crazy than Seth Troxler was known to be around the 2010 time period. But Damien introduced me to a lot of artists by way of a mix CD that I've discussed several times on this channel, but I'll bring it up again. It was called Sci-Fi Lo-Fi, and I'll give you a picture of the cover here. It came out in 2008, and it was one of the coolest mix CDs that I've ever come across because it was so eclectic. Some of the tracks are beat matched into each other in a, traditional DJ blend style, and some of the tracks segue into each other with weird ambience. And I really like that Damien built a mix CD that wasn't just a complete beat matched, like homogenized succession of tracks. It was like, I'm gonna pull this little odd one and this weird one and that weird one, and I'm gonna put this track from 1988 next to this one from 2014, and I'm gonna make them work together. So I loved him for that, and that CD, Sci-Fi Lo-Fi, kicks off with something that Weatherall made that I think is one of the craziest tracks out of his catalog. It's by Innersphere, and it's called Out of Body. Now, Out of Body original mix is no slouch. It reminds me very much, if you've seen the movie Groove, and if you remember like their chill out side back room scene, there's a part in where the camera kind of like zooms in on the subwoofer, and you can see it just sort of like pulsing some like crazy minimal Richie Hawtin type, mind scrambler type beat. And the track Innersphere Out of Body really reminds me of that vibe. Like it's down tempo, it's weird, and it's meant to kind of like bug people out. And I feel like Weatherall took a really cool backroom track and added like almost like a dub influence to it, and it just came out in a very particularly odd fashion that I find very satisfying to sit and listen to, especially maybe in the evenings when I'm trying to just hang out and catch a vibe. Um, the elements of the track, like I said, there's something almost like Jamaica about it. I don't know if it's the shakers. I don't know if it's the odd guitar twangs. The bass line is one of those chest rumblers where you, like I said, the speaker pulsing, right? This is something that would hit you in the chest or make your ear itch. If you've ever had a bass line like hit you really hard, sometimes it makes your ear itch. You're like, oh my gosh. That's what this track is, and I absolutely love that Weatherall just showed off his range. He didn't just do a house track or a techno remix, which he probably could have done if he wanted to. He went weird and he made a dub record, and I love it. In 1992, a duo named Brothers Love Dubs, which consisted of Dave Seaman and I think the other guy's name was Steve Anderson, made a track or a double EP called The Mighty Ming, or it was somehow centering around the word Ming. Now I don't know who or what Ming is. I wasn't able to figure that out, and I guess I don't really care. There's a Brothers Love Dub Mighty Ming double pack remix that has a Sabers of Paradise remix on it, and that remix is okay. I mean, it's a housey remix that shows off some of what Weatherall can do in the house realm, but I don't really like that one as much as I like this one here. Now this is kind of a sneaky version of Mighty Ming that you can only get on this pack here. So we're talking about Side D, Mighty Ming, and this is a Sabers of Paradise slow remix. You have to have the slow remix, and this is the only one. This is the only vinyl that has the slow version on it. The slow version was originally debuted in Weatherall's 1993 Essential Mix, and you can hear, I'm pretty sure it's Pete Tong's voice, and Pete Tong is reverbing. I think he says something about sabers or Sabers of Paradise, and his voice like hits and echoes over top of this super slow, dark, cracked out minor key beat. My favorite element of this, aside from the slow tempo and the lazy, hazy, crazy vibe, is the kick drum. The kick drum almost has this stadium-sized reverb on it that I think lended itself, or probably lend itself very well to like a concrete underground rave vibe in the mid-90s. I mean, this has got like just rave written all over it. And when I talked about elements sitting really nicely together in a lot of Weatherall's remixes, this is like a great example of that. This is absolutely top shelf mid-90s rave gear. One of the interesting things that I learned about Andrew Weatherall is that his career, at least from what I can tell on Discogs, actually started out primarily as remixing. It wasn't until 1993 when he joined the trio of Sabres of Paradise that he started putting out his own original productions. And if you look at the straight up Andrew Weatherall catalog, there weren't any original productions until the late 90s. So it was almost like how Danny Tenaglia broke into the house scene over here in the States with remixing popular tracks. Andrew Weatherall was doing the same thing across the pond around the same time period. And one of the tracks that has really stood the test of time is this one here. This is Flowered Up. Flowered Up is like a 5-person group that did a track called Weekender. Now, this was released in 1992, and Weatherall remixed it with a pair of remixes that are like slightly confusingly named, so you have to be particular about the name of them. The name here is Audrey is a Little Bit More Partial. That's the mix that I like. That's a 17-minute version. On the other side of this reissue that I'll talk about here in a second is the Audrey is Partial. So you have the Audrey is a Bit More Partial mix, 17 minutes, and Audrey is Partial, 15 minutes. The 15-minute version doesn't do it for me, I'll be honest, but the 17-minute, I will say this, I only really like the first 2/3 of the track, which is where it has the more up-tempo, almost like house, maybe, I would call it like a straight up like 90s house track. It then breaks down into a slower, more downbeat segment of the track for the last third of it, which just, I don't dislike it, but I would probably mix out of it before I got to that part. But getting back to Weatherall's slickness with the elements, there's like this little whooshing bass dig that you'll be able to hear in the sample here. It just sits so well with the rest of the elements, and here you can hear a minor key piano that is just jamming out and just creating a really, really creepy, intense, beautiful rave vibe. So again, that was the Audrey is a Bit More Partial mix, 17 minutes. And thank God for these reissues, because going back and trying to dig up some of these after Andrew's passing, the value of the vinyl went way up, and it became a lot more costly to get a lot of records that used to be a little bit cheaper. You know, they used to be 10, 20 bucks, and now you're looking at 30 or 40 unless you get this reissue. This reissue came out in 2021. You can get it on black or yellow vinyl. And it's a well-cut vinyl. It's something that I would recommend for DJing, and it sounds great. And bringing it home here, I talked briefly in my intro about Two Lone Swordsmen. That was a duo that Andrew did with another artist named Keith Tenniswood. And Two Lone Swordsmen are beloved. I will admit that this is currently a mostly blind spot in my catalog. I just haven't had a lot of time to go back and sift through and see what those guys were able to crank out. But here, they made an interesting cameo appearance on a label that I love and that most of my dub techno fans love, which is Sushi Tech. And Sushi Tech is run by a guy named Yasi Amoyal. And Yasi basically went back, I think this was in 2020 or 2021, during the pandemic basically. He released this series called Fleur, and there's 5 vinyls in this plus a bonus vinyl. And it's a very educational vinyl series, right? So it's the type of tracks that Well, Yasi chose them because he loves them, right? They're personal classics of his, but they're sophisticated tracks. They're not flash in the pan popular tracks. They're tracks that might have been a little bit overlooked, or that you need to listen to 3 or 4 times, or that you need to listen to in a particular vibe to get into. So they're sophisticated. They're like connoisseur tracks. That's what they are. And Two Lone Swordsmen made an appearance on Floor Part 3 here with a track that Yasi admitted he basically said he went to hell and back trying to get the licensing and the, I guess, the original DATs, or I don't know what they're called, the original recording files from Two Lone Swordsmen for this. The original version of the track here, which was called Felt Under Pressure, was released on a CD called Audio Files 1.1. And it was like on a relatively obscure label called Firewire, and it came out in 1999. So somehow Yasi went above and beyond to get the, like I said, the original sonic recordings for this and pressed them to vinyl. And one of the other cool things about it is, along with the music, which, you know, any Sushi Tech pressing is going to be gold. I mean, I've yet to come across a bad Sushi Tech pressing. Yasi included these cool insert cards that tell the backstory of all the tracks that Yasi chose for this series in the compilation. And I think this is Yasi right here. I think this is him. But I highly recommend, if you want like an educational music experience and just tracks pulled from all different time periods and pressed with high quality, almost like audiophile quality, I really recommend this Fleur series. And getting back to specifically the track here, Two Lone Swordsmen, Felt Under Pressure, very heavy on like the Peter Grumich, Baby Ford, late 90s, early 2000s minimal vibe. There was a lot of minimal that came out in the late 90s, I would say from 97 to 2002. It was really bass heavy, dark, and like super dirty stuff. And that's a time period that I specifically love in electronic music, and I think this is a really good example of it. All right, and that's it for this episode here. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you found this educational. Please keep in mind that like I said, I'm still new to the Andrew Weatherall catalog, and a lot of this is something that I've only discovered in the last 2 or 3 years here. So if you guys have other recommendations for things that I need to check out in Weatherall's back catalog, please post them down below. I would love to go and dig around. Andrew, I'm sorry you're gone. Thank you so much for the music, and we love you. Take care, everyone.